On Public Accounts.
In a hybrid format, pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to ask all members and other in-person participants to consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. Veuillez garder l'esprit des mesures préventives en place pour...
Please keep these measures in mind to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters.
Approved earpiece. Keep your earpiece away from the microphones at all time. When you're not using your earpiece, place it face down on the sticker to either your right or your left. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1083, the committee is continuing its study of Report 6, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, of the 2024 reports 5 to 7 of the Auditor General of Canada sent to the committee on Tuesday, June 4th, 2024.
This is from the National Research Council of Canada. Mitch Davies, President. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming in. And David Lisk, Vice President, Industrial Research Assistant Program. Nice to see you as well. You will have collectively a maximum of 5 minutes for your remarks, after which we'll proceed to rounds of questions from the members. So over to you for a 5-minute opening, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation to speak with you today about the National Research Council of Canada as part of this committee's study of the Auditor General's report on SDTC. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the NRC's activities take place across the country, from the unceded, shared, current and traditional territories of First Nations, Inuit and Métis people. Nous sommes conscients du privilège qui nous a été.
We recognize our privilege to be able to conduct research and drive innovation on these lands, and we pay respect to the peoples who were here before us.
I'm here today with David Lisk, the Vice President of NRC IRAP. As Canada's largest federal research organization, the NRC advances scientific knowledge, supports business innovation, and provides science-based policy solutions. With nationwide facilities and collaborations, the NRC unites scientists, industry, academia, and global partners. The CNRC emploie plus de 4,000.
The CNRC employs more than 4,300 employees located across the country. The NRC's vision is to bring about a better Canada and a better world through excellence in research and innovation.
Conducting research for more than 75 years, NRC has provided key support to innovative Canadian small and medium-sized businesses through the NRC Industrial Research Assistance Program, or NRC IRAP, to develop innovations that drive the growth of these businesses and Canada's economy. The NRC IRAP has been instrumental in ensuring SMEs have the support they need to grow, innovate, and contribute to Canada's economic growth, job creation, and professional opportunities for students and recent graduates. Rien qu'au cœur de l'exercice 2023.
In the fiscal year 2023-2024, NRC IRAP supported over 9,000 clients and provided funding to around 3,000 firms. This assistance contributed to the creation of approximately 12,000 jobs, with client firms experiencing a 35% increase in revenue, as well as a 21% growth in employee numbers.
Through a nationwide network of more than 273 industrial technology advisors who are located in communities across Canada, working closely with companies by providing technical and business advice, as well as research and development funding and referrals for an evolving portfolio of SME clients. With a long-standing record of successfully supporting SME growth, NRC IRAP has become a cornerstone of Canada's innovation ecosystem and one of the flagship Government of Canada programs, given an important role in helping Canadian businesses grow and thrive. On June 4th, 2024, following the tabling of the Auditor General's audit report on Sustainable Development Technology Canada, the Government of Canada announced that it will transition SDTC to the NRC to enhance accountability, transparency, integrity, and restore public confidence in the program. Cette transition assurera un soutien.
This transition will ensure continued support for clean technology innovations, which are critical for meeting Canada's climate targets, all the while providing stability for current projects and SDTC employees.
Due to its extensive experience and track record supporting innovative, tech-focused SMEs, NRC IRAP was selected to take on SDTC's existing programming and to ensure the economic and environmental goals previously set by SDTC continue to be met. Working under NRC's IRAP governance and due diligence processes and practices. All NRC employees, including SDTC staff who would join NRC IRAP, must adhere to the NRC Conflict of Interest Policy and the Public Sector Values and Ethics Code. Under our policy, NRC IRAP employees are required to provide annual declarations of outside activities. Pour l'instant, le CNRC coopère.
Today, the NRC is working closely with SDTC leadership team to support a smooth transition for SDTC stakeholders, clients, employees, and to ensure the continuity of SDTC programming.
Selon nous, une année suffit.
We anticipate this transition will be completed within 1 year of the announcement. We are ready to move as quickly as is feasible, recognizing the need to stabilize the situation for SDTC stakeholders and the affected employees.
Thank you once again for the invitation to appear today. My colleague and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll begin our first round. First round is 4 members, each with 6 minutes each. Mr. Perkins, you will lead us off, please, for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. I just say on a personal note, last night at 10:30 was the 26th anniversary of the tragedy of Swiss Air flight downing and crash in my riding near Peggy's Cove, where over 200 individuals died, and it's still a trauma for many people in the riding. I'd just like to acknowledge that and all the people in my riding that are still suffering from that and the families who lost loved ones. In your opening, you mentioned that the SDTC announcement, otherwise known from our side as the Green Slush Fund, was announced on June 4th, basically within hours of the release of the Auditor General's report on the Green Slush Fund, conflicts of interest, and misuse of taxpayer money. Was the Minister or the Minister's office, the Minister of Industry, Minister's office, and or the Deputy Minister in touch with NRC before that announcement for this transfer?
Mr. Chair, the NRC would have been involved at a working level in terms of options that I assume the department was considering for SDTC sometime in the spring of that year. And so, yes, we had interaction with the department officials on the announcement. Obviously, we had to think about it from a planning point of view and prepare ourselves for the day it was announced and get on with the transition that was planned.
So before the Auditor General's results are out, the Minister was talking about the transition to you. Did the Minister or his staff meet in that preparation with your department?
So, Mr. Chair, the advice or interaction with the Minister on the file didn't involve myself or any of the staff at the NRC. So we would work through the department on any material they were looking for from us in regards to the consideration of that. Options that may well have been considered or advice given. We didn't have any visibility to that directly. It's not our role to advise. Obviously, we're there to support the portfolio and the Minister. If they assign us a job and want to assess it, then we can help them undertake that work.
And were there any meetings with the Prime Minister's office or the Privy Council office in that preparation?
So I can't speak to any meetings that I'm aware of that I was involved with or any staff that I'm aware of directly with the Prime Minister's office in regard to the transition. I can assume because matters that relate to the way government's organized, there could have been working level contacts on, like we call machinery business, looking at options that could be considered. But again, that's something that I wasn't involved in directly.
My understanding, I think from your presentation and the releases, this is being wrapped into the IRAP structure, governance structure within the NRC, at least for the next year, with an acting board of 3 former public servants, I believe. Do they all report to you, Mr. Lisk?
So,
because you have a governance structure for IRAP that reports to you, am I correct?
so currently, SDTC has its own structure, and it has the board members that you're talking about. We have our own operating structure as IRAP, which lives inside of the NRC. When the transition happens, the SDTC structure will be collapsed eventually, and IRAP will take over operations of the program, and also all of the staff will come to implement those operations. And so to answer your question, we do not have a relationship with SDTC in the way you're describing. The board
does not.
The board
It's
does.
still operating independently under those 3 acting board members.
That is correct.
Are you working with management, I presume, and the acting CEO on the transfer?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, just to be absolutely clear, because I appreciate the question that's being asked. So the interim board does not report to NRC in any manner. We work with the interim board representing the foundation. We work with the staff at SDTC on the transition planning. But the interim board will, again, wind up its activities when the foundation's wound up. And then once we've taken over the program, there's no ongoing relationship between us and the interim board.
Well,
And they don't report to us. They're not going to become part of our reporting structure. The foundation won't exist as far as the ongoing programming is concerned.
And the governance of all of that will exist sort of the way IRAP is done now, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So when I look at the IRAP governance structure, I see very little accountability to Parliament. In fact, I see none. That IRAP board is not governor and council appointed. It's appointed by the members of NRC. I presume when I read it, it's under Mr. Lisk. He has the responsibility for appointing the board members. And there is no publicly available information that I can see in disclosures of where that money goes on those individual donations. When I go to the SDTC site, I can see everything they've done since their inception. So is it the intent that the IRAP governance structure, where nothing is transparent to the public or accountable to Parliament, is what will be what this will evolve into?
So, Mr. Chair, by delivering the program through NRC IRAP, all of the transparency and disclosure requirements that apply to any federal organization will apply, which means funding will be proactively disclosed as it is. The Financial Administration Act will apply. Decisions will be made by the employees of the organization, in this case, as they've been made in NRC IRAP since its inception. So they're made by professionals, they're made by public servants.
Thank you. That is your time, Mr. Perkins. Thank you, Mr. Davies. Turning now to our next member, Mr. Weiler, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I do want to thank Mr. Davies and Mr. Lisk for joining our committee today as we continue our study on SDTC. I want to pick up a little bit on where Mr. Perkins was going with his questioning. This will be very helpful for us. So in June, when the minister announced that SDTC was going to be transitioned under the NRC, I think it would be really helpful for us to learn about what's going to be different and what to expect. So would SDTC still be classified as an arm's length organization, or does this transition under the NRC, which is a Government of Canada organization, change that?
So, Mr. Chair, subsequent to the transition, there will no longer be an arm's length organization that's in charge of the funding. That's going to be transferred to us, and then we'll be delivering for sustainable development technology development purposes and helping entrepreneurs. And the accountability and the structure that will exist will be the same that applies to a departmental corporation as we have it now with the NRC IRAP and all the financial administration, all the sort of public administration frameworks that are an application for departments that are common in our system, into audit committees, public disclosure, the financial administration of funds in the public service. All that will apply, and there'll be no arm's length body involved.
Thank you. And would you say that SDTC's mission aligns with that of the NRC? And in short, would you say this transition would then make sense to you?
Mr. Chair, supporting innovators, supporting entrepreneurs is most certainly within our mandate and mission. NRC IRAP has been doing that directly with small, medium-sized businesses for over 75 years, and quite successfully so, based on testimonials and things that Canadians have observed about the program and its strengths. Also, at this level of our strategic plan, climate and sustainability is a goal, a priority for the National Research Council in the next 5 years for our new strategic plan. So we see that as being aligned with our goals, our capabilities, the interests we have to support Canada with science and technology that's there for our future to help our growth and also respond to the challenges that Canada faces.
Thank you. And I can definitely confirm I've heard some of the same things and seen some of the companies that it's helped in my riding that are really on the leading edge of clean technology. Moving on, could you tell us specifically what the transition means for funding to the SDTC and the funding that the SDTC in turn disperses to its projects? So does that now fall under the NRC's processes and protocol?
There's kind of two worlds to sort of take into account. Right now, there's a question of the restart and the evaluation of all the files that SCTC has to determine their eligibility. Obviously, the observations made by the Auditor General and what to do to follow up on that. And I think that's been subject of testimony that's been given here previously. Once that work's done and the file's transferred, then that's the point in time that the NRC IRAP will take care of working with those files, those clients, and also running the program on an ongoing basis. But at the moment, all the files are with SDTC, and they're undertaking work that they've talked about here. And when that's completed, it'll then start the transfer process to us, and then we'll run it from that point forward. And obviously, we'll establish the terms and conditions as we would through Treasury Board that will provide for the authority for this programming to continue. And that works, preparing that work is underway now.
Thank you. And what kind of oversight will be exercised over the financial channels at SDTC going forward?
Mr. Chair, so we won't obviously be involved in oversight of anything at SDTC as far as the NRC IRAP. Perhaps that's what the member's question is related to. Obviously, the decision-making processes would obviously follow the kind of way things have been done for the history of NRC IRAP, which is we have professionals, people with business experience. They work with clients, they develop an understanding of their business, what they're trying to do, and then they would work with them on projects and take it through our process for decision-making. Decisions are made by public servants with the authority to take those decisions. There could be advice and expertise brought to bear, particular for larger investments to have some external views. But those are not to take decisions, but they're to advise us, because obviously the most important thing here is that we take decisions that are sensitive to the market and technology realities, and obviously we want to have the maximum amount of skill and expertise brought to bear in making those decisions.
Certainly. And, moving forward, are you able to speak to any strategies that you have in place to prevent the type of conflicts of interest issues that arose with SDTC going forward, particularly in the context of how funding decisions are going to be made as it rolls into an NRC?
And Mr. Chair, I think there's an important, important understanding on the part of NRC IRAP and how it conducts its business is that we have people that join the organization from the private sector. So when they join, obviously they have to disclose, make us aware of any interests they have, and they also have to kind of bring themselves into line with our conflict of interest policies. That's applied for our staff, because the most important thing is the perception of what they're doing and the reality, but perception is equally important. So we have a process undertaken with our staff to ensure they disclose what they need to under our policy, and then they can conduct their business with their clients without someone having a question of whether things are being done in a fair way. And that's what's important. That's built into the system we have that relates to our employees, and that will apply in the case of employees that would join us from SDTC or they'll have any involvement in the SDTC programming in the future.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Now we have Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Sustainable Development Technology Canada has spoiled a good idea, funding that normally should be well used, but they have spoiled this, and that's what we see with the Liberal government right now. Now, how can we ensure that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater when we have numerous projects that should exist and many companies depend upon this fund for their existence? There's an example of a company that was waiting for their second $100,000 payment that they should have got last March but didn't get it. They had to lay off 4 employees. Clients have lost trust in the company. There's a lack of competitiveness now. And so there are many companies that aren't doing well because of the greed of certain members of the board. And so how is the NRC going to manage this so that these companies receive their funding as soon as possible? I know that these projects are being assessed, but can we have some clear information? Because we need to be able to predict what's going to happen when we're waiting for money from the government. It's supposed to be very reliable funding. Because, yes, they're in the private sector, but they're waiting up on public funding. So what can they say to their teams, their clients, in order to have a certain amount of predictability? Do you have an idea of when these companies will receive the money that they're owed?
The question, and it's important, and I mentioned it in our opening comments, that stability and predictability for the stakeholders, the companies that work with SDTC is very important. Obviously, we want to see the transition concluded within a year, and we are hoping to do it earlier than that. The question of the funding that a given company might well be waiting for now, I think that's obviously important, and it's with the SDTC organization and the interim board. They have to examine, they're spoken here about they're reviewing the files, given that questions and observations have been raised in terms of eligibility in some cases and so on. So they have to complete that work, and so the restart work is not undertaken at the NRC at this time. We will take on the files once that is done. Files that are, valid, that conform to the contribution agreement. Those are the files that will be transferred to us. So, I think it's important. The member's question is very well understood in terms of needing to get this going, and for the companies that are waiting, the real need for them from a business point of view. But the restart is not something the NRC is directly involved with. It's with the SDTC and its board and staff.
Comment allez-vous vous assurer?
How are you going to ensure that, I spoke of a certain case and you've mentioned conflict of interest, and I'm imagining if I talk about this, you're going to say that you have your own directives and that you're careful with this issue of conflict of interest. But so once SDTC will be integrated into the NRC, how will you ensure that these conflict of interest issues will not happen ever again? Earlier, we spoke and Mr. Lisk heard this. How will we ensure, that there are protections because people will want to take advantage of this funding? So how will NRC ensure that they're acting in a noble manner?
I think it is, given the objectives the government has provided to us to run this program and restore public confidence. I mean, it's obviously weighs on us that we have to do this very well, do a solid job. I think, it has been observed in the previous testimony as to the nature of the foundation itself and its governance, and having obviously people from the sector, a small sector in Canada, particularly at its outset, involved in decision making and so on. That situation does not have a parallel in the NRC in the way we operate. Our decision making rests on people who are employees of the organization and professionals that work under the values and ethics, the conflict of interest, and really work on behalf of the public interest as part of a public organization. And I think, obviously, we take very seriously the need to run this program to the highest standards going forward.
Merci, Monsieur Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. When you noticed several months ago that there were conflict of interest issues and the Treasury Board asked the departments to look at which employees were involved with this, did you do this with the NRC?
Is always under taken at the National Research Council. I mean, every time someone's hired, people have to also look at their activities and disclose where there's need to do so. So it's actually a living area of continuous improvement.
Avez-vous identifié?
Did you identify certain people that may have a second job or may have a relationship with certain companies?
There would be circumstances in the disclosure of conflict of interest where we'd have to work through our ethics office on mitigation or matters that would address those circumstances, including, of course, sometimes having people withdraw or change their involvements or investments.
Est-ce que c'est arrivé récemment? Est-ce que
Did this happen recently? Did you assess? Did you change things over the last several months? Given that we have some very shameful examples, such as the Department of Defense. So did you question employees? The Auditor General did this at their office. Did you do the same?
I would mention, earlier in the summer, I actually asked all the management level of the National Research Council to look at their disclosures and bring them completely up to date. And that I'll be able to get a report on that in the weeks ahead to know that everyone has done so. Second is we have regular training that's been taken by thousands of employees across the National Research Council on what their obligations are, so it's absolutely clear what they have to do and how to conduct themselves. I think we take it very seriously, and we're working, as every large public organization does, to emphasize that. And I've done that personally with all the people that are in the management ranks, and ask them also that they have to do that so that they show to their employees what we're expecting and that they model the right kind of conduct in the workplace.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Joining us virtually, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses and my colleagues for your very good questions today. I do want to return to the subject of restoring public confidence and the AG's report. Mr. Davies, you're aware that the AG's report did recommend several recommendations, of course, prior to the establishment of the process that's currently underway that would transfer much of SDTC's former role to the National Research Council and, of course, the IRAP program that we've talked about a bit today. In your work towards restoring public confidence, I think it's important to take into account the victims of this. And to one of my former colleagues who mentioned this already earlier, it is important that we try to balance what is obviously a really good policy, but recognize a really strong and very well evidenced situation of misconduct, particularly conflict of interest, organizational mismanagement, and even employee and serious HR concerns that were brought forward earlier at the Ethics Committee last year. When it comes to, for example, some of those persons in the work of restoring public confidence, of course, taxpayers need to know that funds are properly being administered, as one of the victims in this case, to ensure that they themselves have confidence that the work that you're undertaking is going to ensure that taxpayers do get true value. Second to that, of course, we have the employees. I mentioned that whistleblowers who had to eventually come forward to a House of Commons committee to make relevant their very serious HR complaints and concerns of what they had witnessed. We had also heard from that time that HR managers were being fired left, right, and center. There was huge issues of HR where employees ultimately had to leave. In addition to that, lastly, it's our environment that takes, I think, a very large impact from the lack of, or at least the disablement of this program. And I think many young Canadians in particular are hoping to see that the work you do to rebuild the confidence in this kind of work is actually restored. So just speaking directly to the work of restoring public confidence, can you speak to how, what processes that you've undertaken in response to the Auditor General's report, particularly her recommendations she makes throughout Section 6? There's very many recommendations, but have you taken into account the Auditor General's recommendations and your work to restore public confidence in this work?
So, Mr. Chair, yes, I would say I think it's really important that people take into account the observations that have been made. Reports also the Commissioner of Ethics on the question. Those things have been distributed at the Council, and certainly we'll be discussing them further as the days go ahead. And I think NRC IRAP, for what it's done for 75 years, can only continue to do it if it does it well and to a high standard. And we take that seriously because these programs are important. They're important for our economy to support small, medium-sized businesses that are taking on very risky things to advance their technology and to do innovative things. And obviously, it's really important that everyone at the council take that into account in the way we run things that we're entrusted to do, and also that we live that every day. I think it's regrettable. Obviously, there's circumstances here that are definitely a challenge, but we'll take full measure of all the observations and take those into account in the way we do business, and obviously fulfill what the government's asked us to do, which is to restore trust in this area of programming and get it up and running as fast as we possibly can.
In addition to some of that, just backing up a bit in terms of how the issue with SDTC came to light and some of the concerns that were brought forward at that time to committee members in ethics. Prior to that, of course, these employees who are trying to raise alarms about the very serious allegations and concerns related to the situation at SDTC, at any point in time, did anyone, particularly members of SDTC, former chair, board, staff members, come to the NRC to report such allegations?
So, Mr. Chair, not to my awareness, do I have any information on that? No.
And in terms of making sure that whistleblowers and employees and those who work at SDTC in the transfer of this work are well protected and well encouraged to continue their good work, but also to ensure that they themselves feel safe in the workplace, what measures are you undertaking in the transition of the program to ensure worker safety?
Mr. Chair, I think perhaps I've just opened by explaining that in our workplace, we have mechanisms inside the workplace to allow people to disclose issues where they have questions of the way we're proceeding, the way work's been done, whether it's questions of health and safety, whether it's the way we're administering things. We have a process to disclose those internally. Also, public servants can avail themselves of the Act, which has been established, in a parliamentary office for that, if they so choose. So I think those are strong guardrails, strong processes that are in place in the public service that apply and are there for all employees and their protection. We've taken time to meet. I've met with all of the SDTC employees with the town hall to welcome them, to explain to them, National Research Council, how we work, the way things will proceed in the days ahead, and to open up strong lines of communication. It's very important that this group of employees are taken into account fully, and we obviously will be offering them offers of employment, and we want their expertise as well, so we can run this program in a solid fashion, in line with its objectives to support sustainable development.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Davies.
you.
I think
And that is your time. Mr. Desjardins, yes. Being the second round, going to Mr. Brock now for 5 minutes, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Davies and Mr. Lisk, for your attendance today. I listened very carefully, Mr. Davies, to your opening statement, and the hallmark from my perspective is the desire to restore public confidence and trust. It's no small wonder, it's going to be a large feat to accomplish, but it's no small wonder you state that, because after 9 years of Justin Trudeau and his government, one of the most ethically challenged and corrupt governments this country has ever seen, millions of Canadians are skeptical when they hear senior civil servants uttering words that trust us. We're going to restore confidence in the program. We're going to restore the oversight that should have been there in the first place. This arm's-length corporation, SDTC, was responsible for essentially doling out free money to the tune of almost $393 million to companies that were conflicted. It's no small wonder that the Assistant Deputy Minister of ISED uttered the phrase, "It was free money." This is almost a sponsorship scandal level kind of giveaway. Public confidence is shattered with the ability of this government to distribute taxpayer monies in a prudent and ethical manner. So if I understand you correctly, the current SDTC organization is under the umbrella of NRC, correct?
Mr. Chair, it is not.
It is not.
No.
They are with IRAP?
Mr. Chair, the SDTC still exists as a foundation. It has an interim board. Its employees are still employees of the foundation.
Right.
They're not part of the NRC.
Okay. So who's supervising? Who's providing that daily supervision and monitoring of granting monies to these startup green companies? Who is doing that?
Mr. Chair, I believe Paul Booth was here on a previous testimony. He's one of the interim board members, I believe the chair. So the interim board is supervising as the board of SCTC the activities.
So we have
of the
one
foundation.
chair and we have two directors doing all the supervision.
So
Is that correct?
As I understand, sir, Mr. Chair, there are three interim board members and then the management of SCTC
Okay.
that run the organization at this time.
All right. So they are providing the oversight on behalf of the federal government. Is that correct?
And Mr. Chair, there's also, as I understand it, there's a contribution agreement.
I understand that.
Between the department
So
and the
NRC
organization
is not
also.
providing any oversight
Once we have taken on responsibility for the program.
at the moment.
As
NRC
it
is
stands
not
now.
providing oversight, correct?
Mr. Chair, I would say that's accurate, yes.
And
we're
IRAP
doing
is
everything.
not providing oversight.
We'll be involved once the transition's taken place.
Okay. Well, according to the minister in his statement on June 4th, 2024, he talks about essentially the NRC providing a level of oversight. The actions were rooted in our commitment to transparency, accountability, upholding the highest standards of integrity, says the minister. As Government of Canada organization, the NRC is subject to rigorous and stringent oversight of its personnel and finances. This structure will help rebuild public trust while increasing accountability, transparency, and integrity. So he's actually misled Canadians in believing that you're providing that extra layer of transparency and accountability, which is the furthest from the truth. That's not happening right now. You're going to move towards that in 2026, but money is being channeled right now by one board chair and 3 board members and the current SDTC organization, because no one was fired. The existing board of SDTC either resigned in shame or resigned after public pressure. The current board chair found guilty of 2 ethical violations by the ethics commissioner. All of the directors resigned in shame. So what confidence can Canadians have moving forward that between now and 2024 and 2026, when the new corporation takes over, that there's any accountability, any transparency? How are Canadians supposed to feel confidence, sir, after hearing my exchange with you right now? What confidence can you give them?
So, Mr. Chair, just a clarification that the transfer that will be undertaken will be done within this year. And we would hope if we can do that earlier, we will do so. The second is prior testimony has been given here from the department and SCTC, the interim board member who was here, that spoke about the process they're undertaking, and they've accepted the Auditor General's findings, and actually they're reviewing all the files with that in mind. And that interim board was put in place, I think, obviously because of the importance of public trust and the need to establish leadership at SDTC right now to do that work, and to do that work before it's transferred to the NRC in the coming year. So certainly also that transfer will take place hopefully in the 4th quarter of this fiscal year, and we're endeavoring to make that happen. But in the interim, obviously, the testimony that's been provided here before by the department and the interim board has talked about them accepting those recommendations and taking that fully into account in the review they're doing right now.
Thank you.
So I'll leave them to speak to
Thank
how
you
they're operating.
very much. Turning out to Ms. Kelly, do you have the floor for 5 minutes, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Just picking up on that oversight piece, the role of the Public Accounts Committee is to provide oversight of how public funds are spent. The role of ministers within their departments is to provide that oversight of the work of departments. We are in no way here to defend any actions by bureaucrats, by departments. We are here to provide oversight of what happened and how can we improve that process. Now, the minister, as soon as he learned, and the Auditor General in her report with the recommendations, took action right away. And I want you to help us understand, is the NRC going to be capable of fulfilling the recommendations that have been provided by the Auditor General and the work of the minister in providing that oversight? Is it effective in this point?
So, Mr. Chair, I would say certainly we are capable of delivering the programming. I think also delivering it in line with the recommendations that have been made. On two levels, I think that are important. First, of course, is ensuring that we're working with clients that are fully eligible in the terms and conditions of the program. It's something that takes place at NRC IRAP now and has for a long time, and making sure we're working with clients that are eligible for the program support. Second, obviously, to do this work in a system that has strong checks and balances, oversight, all the things that you would expect to ensure people can see who we're funding and on what terms, who's taking decisions, and that any perceptions of conflict of interest are something that's addressed by our policy and our employees actually fulfilling their responsibilities under that policy to ensure it's adhered to. Third, of course, I guess I would also say the governance is certainly different in the NRC IRAP as an organization in the public sector where we're accountable for the decisions we take as employees of government and not.
Excuse me. Now, this program's been running for decades and decades, am I correct? And so it has transitioned from government to government over these decades that it's run. Is this the fault of the minister? Is this a corrupt government, as the opposition parties love to accuse are? Or is there an opportunity that the minister took to clean up what maybe previous governments have created a muck of?
So, Mr. Chair, I think it's been discussed here previously as to the nature of the organization, the setup of the foundation, which was undertaken a long time ago, and a fairly unique circumstance to set up an outside organization that operates as it does. Obviously, it was meant to operate in close connection with the sector, and I think there's been testimony given on that and observations about that being taken into account. And I think obviously there's some serious thought that needs to be undertaken on that. I think as far as we're concerned, we're available obviously to help on the transition to continue the support to the sector and the companies that are trying to do challenging things and innovative things, and then to do it in concordance with our standards of due diligence and the practices we undertake. I don't have any comment on the minister or observations on the other parts of the question.
Thank you. And our opposition members have been talking about the transition and the lack of oversight. So once this, you had mentioned that the transition is in process right now and will occur within the year. What does that mean for Canadians? If you can help us understand what that transition will do ultimately in terms of increasing oversight.
So, Mr. Chair, I think the transition, of course, will mean that the stakeholders that look to SDTC now will have an ongoing opportunity to work with NRC IRAP to be able to assess support and provide support for their important projects, which is obviously a goal from an economy point of view and also from an environmental point of view. I think the other aspect that I think is critical is people will be able to understand that it's taking place inside a departmental corporation subject to oversight at various levels. The Auditor General has jurisdiction over us to come and audit our activities. We have an audit committee. We assess risk across the organization. There's strong processes of internal control, financial management, all of which under the Financial Administration Act, all of that applies to us. In a way it may not apply to an arm's length foundation set up under its own statute and its own with its own requirements. So I think there's a very different world in terms of all the rigor and structure that's in place and that we can provide on an ongoing basis to support the delivery of the program.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Suivant encore, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés pour 2 minutes. Secondes, s'il vous plaît.
2.5 minutes, Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Davies, I'd like to come back to the topic I mentioned before, that being managing conflict of interest issues at the NRC. You mentioned that when you arrived, you asked NRC managers to provide you information on their employees, their teams, etc., to ensure that there are no apparent conflict of interest issues. You said that you were waiting on a report from the management team with the NRC?
Of myself asking all of our management to bring up to date their conflict of interest disclosures. And then I indicated that at the end of the summer period, we would obviously be checking, making sure that it had been undertaken and taking any follow-up steps. So I expect to have that complete information very soon and be able to follow up on what I indicated.
Allez-vous pouvoir partager?
Will you be able to share the conclusions with this committee so that we'll be able to see what happened with SDTC and to ensure that something similar not happen with the NRC?
To indicate that that work had been concluded. I think it's also, one part of work that is actually a larger body of work across the entire council of training support for all employees. We have 4,300 employees under whom, under which work they have to have the conflict of interest requirements applied. So
Merci.
I think it's a
Thank you.
undertaking at the
Merci,
council.
Monsieur Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. I'd like to move on to another topic that was covered by one of my colleagues to my right here. That is the topic of the current management of SDTC. So this is what was said by Mr. Simon Kennedy, the Deputy Minister at SDTC. June 13th, 2024, he replied to me. He said that in the media, SDTC is managed by the NRC. So I would imagine that that was a mistake, which is concerning because we're talking about the Deputy Minister that is of the department responsible for SDTC, who was not aware of how management is working there. So that's concerning because it raises the question, who is really managing this? Who are they accountable to? And who is ensuring that they are complying with guidelines?
Sinclair, on va.
Thank you. Response, please? It was a good question.
I don't have the reference or the quote that's been presented in terms of the Deputy Minister of ISED, what was said. I could only assume that what was being discussed was our role to have a role in running the Sustainable Development Programming that SDTC is responsible for now and has been. And obviously that's going to take place once we've completed the transition this year. Up until that point, it's certainly between ISED and SDTC and its interim board to administer the current contribution agreement and, of course, do what they've said in terms of looking over the files and ensuring that they're in alignment with the AG's recommendations that have been accepted. And that would take place before the transition. So it might be a question of time, I think.
Thank you.
That's,
Alors, suivant, up next, Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor again for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Davies, in regards to the eligibility of projects under your new work to transition the fund, have you taken into consideration some of the recommendations by the Auditor General regarding issues of eligibility? As you likely know, the serious case of mismanagement within SDTC did find by the Auditor General several instances of projects, not the totality of all projects did the Auditor General review, but the sample to which she did review revealed that many projects were actually ineligible for the funding through SDTC and failed to either demonstrate or develop new technology or failed to develop any projects that actually had a potential benefit for the environment. In regards to the eligibility or new eligibility that would be required, Is there work related to the transition in your mind that is taking into account the actual eligibility of new projects? And then I'll have a follow-up question related to the existing projects that are underway or being funded by SDTC and your process of review for them.
So, Mr. Chair, I think the first step is, of course, the eligibility of the projects that SDTC currently has, and the work that's being done between SDTC and ISED to sort that, and then that will take place before the transfer. It's a policy decision as to...
Oh, sorry, Mr. Davies, just because I have a bit of short time.
Sorry.
On that point there, will there be a review of those existing contribution agreements to ensure that taxpayers get their money back for any ineligible projects that are still pending?
So, Mr. Chair, I think that's a question best addressed to the department, SCTC. I think it's been a subject of discussion at the committee before, but it's not something we're directly involved in.
Thank you very much. And then, turning back to the eligibility criteria for new projects, will they be changing?
So, Mr. Chair, as I was saying, the review of eligibility is going on now. Obviously, the files that we'll receive will be those that are eligible as established between the department and SCTC. We'll also have to have approval for terms and conditions for the programming that we'll offer in this space for sustainable technology development, and that'll be established as it would be through appropriate submissions in the government. Obviously, terms and conditions for programs are established by the Treasury Board, and we would follow that process to establish the terms and conditions, and that's a policy decision that the minister and the department will take, and we're doing that preparatory work now so that we can have this thing up and running on the time frame that we've shared here with Canadians within the year.
Thank you very much. That
Davies.
is the time. Turning now to Mr. Genuis, joining us from his porch. Over to you, sir.
Thanks.
It looks very comfortable.
Thank you, Chair. It's not that comfortable, but it is a beautiful day in Alberta and the beautiful riding of Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. And I wanted to maybe just zero in on a quick sort of summary of the Green Slush Fund scandal that we're adjudicating today at the Public Accounts Committee. So you have a fund that is giving money to companies ostensibly related to green technology, but you have in reality board members handing out this money, giving it to companies that they own. You have a group of well-connected insiders who have been placed on this board who are saying, okay, let's give a bit of money to Bob's company over here, Bill's company over there. Oh, my company could use some money too. That is the essence of this scandal. In some cases, you had directors stepping out of the room for those votes that benefited their companies. But in some cases, you also had individuals voting on disbursements that directly benefited companies they own. And it's crazy to me and to many Canadians that this sort of thing could happen. But on the other hand, it is part of a pattern of corruption we're seeing under this government over the last 9 years. And the testimony we're hearing today is to suggest that maybe there's been some changes in the way this program operates. But what I'm getting here is that things have not changed substantially, that we are facing the same problems, the same potential problems of corruption and self-dealing. So I want to drill down on that. You have an interim board right now at the Green Slush Fund that is making decisions about where these disbursements go. Do any members of the current interim board have personal investments in companies that have received money, that could receive money in the future, that are seeking money? Do any current members of that interim board have those kinds of investments?
Mr. Chair, it's not a question I'm in any position to address directly. You have to address that to the individuals involved.
I'm sorry, you can't answer that. We're here adjudicating the question of conflict of interest of board members, and I'm asking you, do any of the current members of the interim board have issues of conflict of interest? Well, why can't you answer that, sir?
So, Mr. Chair, the interim board in no way reports to NRC, doesn't fall under any jurisdiction. We have our policy for conflict of interest. Obviously, the appointment process used for those interim board members is what applies to their appointments and any work that was done to review matters of conflict of interest. So I can't speak to it directly from the NRC.
So it's been 9 years. You have board members that are benefiting directly from decisions of the board. sometimes stepping out of the room when those are voted on, sometimes not. And we have, at present, a board where there may or may not be continuing issues of conflict of interest. That underlines the fact that despite all the discussion around this scandal, the government has not fundamentally changed what's happening. Now, the proposed future transition to these decisions being under the auspices of the National Research Council. This committee has studied the problem of public servants themselves owning companies or being involved in companies that have been benefited from government contracts. So can you tell us, sir, with respect to this future proposed transition to the National Research Council, do any National Resource Council employees, NRC, National Research Council employees have investments in companies that receive funding through this slush fund, or that could receive that funding?
So, Mr. Chair, in regards to conflict of interest of our employees, it's explicitly clear that they are not to have investments in companies in which they're with whom they're working. And absolutely that's reviewed when they join us, and it's reviewed on an ongoing basis. And it's quite critical, obviously, given the matter of a real conflict of interest that would put them in if they were to do so, let alone any involvement in the past that could have a concern around perceived conflict of interest.
Thank you. In the time I have left, do any ministers, political staff, PCO staff, PMO staff, anybody who could be involved in directing NRC's decisions, would any of them be able to have investments in companies that benefit from disbursements through this Green Slush Fund?
Mr. Chair, I think, as far as how I could answer it is the administration of program at the National Research Council is conducted by our staff. And it's under their professional judgment in the system.
But I think the public would still like to know, and just a yes or no, would PCO employees, political staff in the minister's office, ministers, PMO employees be able to have these kinds of investments benefiting from the slush fund?
Mr. Chair, I can't really speak
yes
to any
no.
given employees that are not under my care or responsibility in their offices, but they don't have anything to do with our administration and decision-making on investments we make of public funds.
Thank you. Mr. Genuis, that is the time. You will have an opportunity again to revisit this. Turning now to Ms. Bradford. Ms. Bradford joining us virtually as well. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. In his announcement, the minister said that this move would be done to increase oversight of over the SDTC. Have you reviewed the AG's report, and is this something that the NRC is equipped to do?
So, Mr. Chair, yes, I personally read the recommendations of the report, observations made, the response that's been made as well by SDTC to the report. Given the role we're going to play in the future in this transition, all of those observations are very important. And obviously, the structure of the foundation itself, which was commented on in prior testimony here, it doesn't apply in the case of the NRC. And so that's a very strong distinction in what existed before and what will exist after the transition. But I think the most important area that I'd observe is just the need for ongoing vigilance and solid practice in conflict of interest, even if it's a matter of perception. We have public servants that are professional, full-time working for us, so they're pretty busy, and this is their job to run the programs that are entrusted in their care, but also to make sure that everyone understands that they maintain and conduct themselves in a way that people couldn't question. I think that's very important to us.
Okay, so to that point, can you speak broadly to what the NRC's responsibilities would be overviewing the SDTC?
So, Mr. Chair, our responsibility is to deliver the benefits of the program that the government asks us to deliver. And so in this case, it would in some ways be very similar to the kind of programming we've worked with for over 75 years, which is support innovation and entrepreneurship. And that's a really solid part of the current activities of NRC IRAP, and very much something that's at the heart of what we do. I think the important addition here is also to pursue sustainable development technology for the benefit of those clean technologies for the environment for Canadians, and that's something that we work in that area. We have obviously a research goal and a strategic goal in climate and sustainability, but also we'd have expertise joining us from SDTC to help us adjudicate those files and obviously assess the benefits from a sustainable development point of view. So there'd be really two ways to look at a file and find those that have the most strong attributes that meet the terms and conditions of the program, and that we're happy to conduct business with on an ongoing basis. That'll be our goal, and deliver the benefits of the program that Canadians expect.
So what is expected then of the SDTC in turn as a result of the transition?
Mr. Chair, I think the transition is to conduct this on an expedited basis to bring some stability that's needed to the clean tech sector and the stakeholders in that sector so that we can get back to business. Second, I think it's also important that we take into account there's been employees at SDTC that have been involved in this and looking for certainty in terms of their own careers, and we look forward to making offers to them so they can join our team. And then third, I think the expectation is that the program can carry on with a high level of confidence that it's being done in a manner that's consistent with public objectives and scrutiny in terms of the way we conduct ourselves in delivering the program. So we've actually got a lot of work to do and a full mandate on a number of levels to respond to this situation, and we're happy to be there to do that for Canadians.
And what are the communication channels like between the SDTC's board and members and officials at NRC?
So, Mr. Chair, we have regular meetings with the interim board, particularly Marta Morgan. I think the board member who was here previously sort of talked about how the board has divided up their work. Ms. Morgan is responsible for working with us on the transition. We meet regularly, really to take account of all the lines of activity. There's a lot of work involved in bringing this program into the NRC, and we're well aligned and coordinated with them. And of course, we also await the work that's being done between the department and SDTC on the files and preparing them for transfer. And then we're doing the kinds of work you'd expect on systems and preparing ourselves from an HR point of view to be able to make offers to the employees and get this done as soon as possible.
Okay. The AG appeared at the Industry Committee last December and spoke to how the complaints of HR violations fell out of scope of the study. As we all know, the minister then tasked an independent third-party investigation into the reports of HR violations at SDTC. As a result of the transition, will SDTC's HR protocol be aligned with NRC's?
So, Mr. Chair, I think the most direct way to respond to that is to ensure everyone understands that the way personnel are managed, the way we work with our employees, that will apply to any employees that join us from SDTC. With all that brings, creating a good workplace, a good environment for them to thrive and make their contribution. And obviously there's strong mechanisms as well where they have concerns that they can raise those through the various systems we have in place, up to and including if they have an issue where they want to disclose something that they're not comfortable with, they can do that inside the organization. That's well established. And obviously there's obviously a parliamentary role there for an officer to look into those questions if employees go to that office to ask for a review of any wrongdoing. So we've got a strong regime that applies to human resources at the National Research Council, and that'll apply to all the SDTC employees that join us.
Thank you. Beginning our third round, we're going back to Mr. Perkins again for 5 minutes, please, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin by sort of a follow-up to my previous questions on this issue of transparency, because you say when it gets, the Green Slush Fund gets merged over into IRAP with the governance structure there, that somehow it'll be subject to all the usual FAA, and I presume that means like access to information. But when I go to the SDTC website, you can print off great detail on every single investment they've made going back to 2001, both active and inactive, when it was given, how much was given, who the proponents were, by date. But no such thing exists for IRAP on a public disclosure that I can see. So it looks to me like by folding this in with IRAP, there will actually be less public transparency and accountability of the Green Slush Fund than more. So will you pledge that everything that SDTC does in its new incarnation under your leadership and the leadership of the Minister of Industry will have at least this? It didn't stop the corruption of $390 million of $800 million going to conflicted parties. But at least we could figure it out and parliamentarians could see it. But I don't see that NRC operates that way.
So Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to follow up with the committee to provide the links to all the proactive disclosure that takes place on the investments we make under NRC IRAP. And I think that would hopefully resolve the member's question as to where you can find the information, because it's important. It's a matter of policy that is made public. And I would say similarly, it's equally important for us to people to know who we invest in and how much and the names of the companies so Canadians can look at that information. And it's something we've done, we do, and we will continue to do, and that will apply, of course, to any funding under any measures for sustainable development technology that we will be offering under NRC IRAP. But I'd like to provide that link to the committee so that the folks can see what we do disclose if they haven't came across it before.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And secondly, IRAP is overseen by a voluntary, I guess, advisory board of 12 people, which I believe are appointed by you, Mr. Lisk. Is that correct?
So we are not, the advisory board that supports IRAP does not have oversight. There's no fiduciary responsibility. All of that rests inside of the NRC and with the government. The purpose of the advisory board is to provide advice to IRAP around programming, program evolution, and developing new policies. So they provide advice. They do not have any oversight.
Do any of the members of the IRAP advisory board do business with SDTC currently?
To my knowledge, no.
Could you double check on that and reconfirm in writing to the clerk, please?
Absolutely.
Also, I would like to understand that I think you said, Mr. Davies, that SDTC would be rolled over by the end of Q4 this year, which for those watching ends on March 31st, to you. But the understanding is that this actually is going to be spun out of the NRC, is it not? Including IRAP, to a new Crown Corporation in 2026. So you'll have very little oversight over the time of what it's doing in actuality, unlike what the minister claimed you would be doing. You have no oversight now, and then it's just going to be flipped to another Crown agency once you've got a hold of it.
So, Mr. Chair, the question is about the Canada Innovation Corporation and the plan that in 26-27 fiscal year that corporation would be put in place. There has been a law passed to create the Crown Corporation. It's just not in effect, so it's a policy question of when that happens. And the government said it will do this in 2026-27.
Looks to me like the new SDTC is pretty much like the old SDTC because it's being governed by a group of acting people. It'll be given to you, and then it'll be flipped out to another group. So you're an agency in the middle to another government agency with no assurance that it's going to have transparency or that the 82%, the Auditor General reviewed 226 projects, 186
Perkins, please.
were conflicted. 186 were conflicted, 82%. Doesn't look like anything's changing to me. Just the name, perhaps where it resides.
So, Mr. Chair, I don't have responsibility as a department. ISED and Finance Canada have responsibility for the Canada Innovation Corporation and of course the policy behind that with the ministers that they support. I think the question is really to look at that statute and see what similarities or differences there are between it and the foundation that is the subject of this committee's work and study. And obviously, I think it was addressed in prior testimony here as well, is that, obviously there's questions of how to set that up and ensure that those sort of, I guess I'd say, initial conditions about governance are sound and proper. And I'd, of course, leave people to observe what they think about the Canada Innovation Corporation in that regard. I think there are differences, at least certainly one is that in the legislation there's a review committee established by the board of that Crown Corp. This isn't in place now, but is provided for, that is separate from the board members, so that decisions would be taken by a review committee rather than the board itself. That was something put in the legislation at the time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for coming today. I'd like to start off by saying let's correct the record. The NRC has extensive experience in the innovation space, and IRAP is a flagship innovation program with over 75 years of experience. I believe that's what you said in your opening statement. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, yes, that is correct. NRC IRAP has been operating for over 75 years and supports close to 10,000 companies with advice and provides close to 3,000 of those companies with financial assistance on an annual basis, depending on the year. But it's a very strong part of the innovation system and quite well known among entrepreneurs as being an important service for them when they're trying to set up their businesses and see them thrive.
Going through the audits, it seems the majority of the IRAP-funded small and medium-sized businesses are profitable as a result of this funding. Can you speak to this?
So, as part of the work that we do with the firms, as we do the assessments, we try to work with the entrepreneurs to help them establish the conditions not only to undertake the research and development work, but also to be able to commercialize and sell their products. Through that mechanism, and because of that, we do track the number of all the firms and their results, and on average, they are growing at 20% or 30% per year in revenue and increasing employment on 20% per year on average. And so, to answer your question directly, generally, they are profitable.
What types of firms are benefiting from this?
From the IRAP program?
Yes.
It's a very broad mandate. It works with any firm that is trying to commercialize innovation, to bring innovation into the marketplace. We have firms that we support in agri-food, in mining, ICT, and just about every sector in the Canadian economy where innovation is being used to create commercial success. It includes also clean tech firms.
So you mentioned the benefit to the economy, and the net benefit of IRAP to the Canadian economy was calculated at $16 billion, 5.3 times higher than the costs of this program. I think that's a good return on investment. Can you elaborate on that?
So I believe the numbers that you're looking at are from the latest evaluation of the IRAP program that was released a couple of years ago. And in the process of evaluation, the costs of the program are compared against the economic benefits through a model that's called a cost-benefit model, and those are the results that were reported by the consultants.
Thank you. STDC's role is also known to support Canada's clean tech firms. Can you tell us what the mission statement is in terms of the clean tech firms?
For SDTC?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't quote their mission to you. Their key role is to work with firms that not only that are bringing innovative clean tech technologies into the marketplace for the benefit of Canadians.
So, how are you going to ensure that this mission of clean tech is back at the core of what STDC does?
Well, certainly, when the program transitions over, it will operate with the same mandate to deliver the benefits to Canadians by the deployment and commercialization of clean technologies across Canada and internationally. As we stand up the program inside of IRAP, that will be maintained with the additional construct that our current programming also supports clean tech firms, but at different stages than SDTC. And so we will be able to bring forward more companies into the SDTC programming suite for them to evaluate and to be able to select the best companies.
And thank you. Very quickly,
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. Very
That's
good.
okay. Thank you.
The time did pass. Suivant encore, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Now, Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Concerning the way in which the NRC manages the various projects that it has under its wing, what guidelines do you have pertaining to conflicts of interest? And what did you learn from the SDTC situation?
So, Mr. Chair, the NRC has a conflict of interest policy that applies to all of our employees. It was revised in 2021 in response to our own audit committee looking for improvements in the program and the way we administer it. Be happy to provide details on the policy to the committee if that would be of interest. And I would say there's a significant program across the entire organization to ensure everyone understands what they're obliged to do, they're trained on it, and that there's due follow-up under the policy.
Merci, Monsieur Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. There is the issue of conflict of interest, but there's also the eligibility of projects. So on an internal level or external audits, is the NRC taking measures to ensure that the projects that have access to this funding be truly eligible and that we don't find ourselves in another SDTC situation?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The situation around projects and whether they are eligible will rest with the Treasury Board terms and conditions that we receive with respect to SDTC and also for the IRAP programming. What we do is establish through our review process assurance that all projects that are brought forward do fit within those Treasury Board guidance.
Qui s'assure de ça?
And who manages this internally? Is there an internal audit team? Who really manages this? Because you have guidelines from the Treasury Board, but then they need to be followed. But we're seeing that these guidelines are not being followed. It's the case of SDTC, but also other Crown corporations.
Chair, I think the question is really answered, but there's two levels. Obviously, the staff that are involved in adjudicating the files and actually making the decisions work as a team, and they document their support to a file, and then it proceeds through the system. Then also we have follow-up work that's done to audit and undertake compliance reviews of the support we provide. Ensure that it is consistent with the terms and conditions, and in very rare cases where we need to recover because of any reason that we've reviewed in the audit, we will do so. And of course, at the NRC, we also have an audit committee which can work with our internal audit function to ensure that the programs are being run in line with their terms and conditions. So there's really a multi-layer approach that's taken, but it starts really with the working level and doing the job well and documenting what you do. And then there's various checks and balances and review and internal scrutiny that is undertaken to ensure that we've done that. And we make any necessary changes and improvements that we have to over time.
Thank you very much. Suivant, up next, it's Mr. Desjardins. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being present for this and answering our questions. I do want to return on the topic of the review process, or at least the new review process and the changes that are recommended largely by the Auditor General. What aspects of the review process, in addition to your internal auditing, will enhance the eligibility review of existing projects funded by SDTC?
So, Mr. Chair, as I was sharing in response to the previous question, reviewing eligibility is really at the core of any of our examination of investments that will be made to provide funding to any business. So that will certainly apply in the case of programming that we offer for sustainable development technology purposes. It's something that staff have to do. They have to document it to make sure that it's well
Mr.
established.
Davies.
Yes.
Just so I can interrupt, specifically on the existing applications that were approved by the former board of SDTC, where there is outstanding funds, would they be subject to the former eligibility criteria to which they may have been successful under SDTC's guidelines before the suspension of funding, or would they fall under the new guidelines which may and potentially disqualify them?
So, Mr. Chair, I think, thank you for the clarification. I understand the question is, there's a process underway now between the department, ISED, and SDTC on the eligibility of the files that they have. The file set will ultimately be transferred over to NRC. That would then carry on under our new terms and conditions. So there is work being done on eligibility, and it's not work that we're directly involved with. That's something that SDTC is doing, and then they're working with the department on it. And then we will establish terms and conditions that will be established, by the Treasury Board for any ongoing role of NRC IRAP and funding clients on an ongoing basis. But that work is now being undertaken right now between the department and SDTC. It doesn't involve NRC in any direct way.
Mr. Davies, do you believe that there's clear leadership in the transfer of this file? That was one of the concerns that was highlighted by the Auditor General, was that we had members, including the Deputy Minister and the board itself, unsure as their roles of their own roles and responsibilities. The way you're describing this, I get some concern that this could be a potential issue that is unresolved. Do you feel that there's the terms to which you've been asked to fulfill as the transfer of this work continues is clear? And is SDTC, or how much does SDTC's current voluntary board have much to do with the existing terms and conditions that you'll be subjected to?
So, Mr. Chair, I mean, from our point of view, the process is clear, and we're working actively with SDTC on the transition, and SDTC is working with the department on the contribution agreement that's currently in place between the department and SDTC. So we keep these things clear for a reason, because there's different parties involved, and we're obviously not involved between the department and SDTC, but equally we're very much engaged with SDTC on the planning of the transfer, because we have to make sure we hit our milestones and do this in a seamless fashion. There's a lot of work involved. I wouldn't underestimate that. And of course, other witnesses have spoken about the work that's being undertaken as we speak on that.
Thank you very much. That is the time. You will have one last opportunity in the next round, Mr. Desjardins. Mr. Brock, back to you for 5 minutes, please.
I want to return to Minister Champagne's announcement to Canadians in June of this year, giving the impression that the NRC would provide that oversight sooner than later. But what we learn now is NRC is not going to provide any oversight until the end of Q4, March 31st of 2025. In the interim, it's literally the same old SDTC, just under perhaps a different chair and 3 different directors. Same employees, nothing has changed. Funding has started. TAP started to run again in June. So it begs the question, type of oversight that is being exemplified by this government. According to the press release, he indicates that his department, ISED, will enhance oversight and monitoring of funding during the transition period. So, how often is Minister Champagne involved in discussions with the NRC, giving them updates about his observations and supervision of funding? How often are you meeting with him?
Mr. Chair, the NRC, myself, and our employees are not meeting directly with the minister on the topic. We would work with the Department of ISED, and of course, we've mentioned also that we're working with SCTC interim board and employees.
Sorry, you as the president are not communicating directly with the minister?
On this topic, actively involved on the transition. We're working with all the officials and the individuals that have
The question is, are you
job.
talking to the minister?
I haven't spoken to the minister on the file.
Is the minister talking to anyone else at the NRC, to your knowledge?
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't be aware of any contact directly from the minister to other members of my team in terms of this file. No, certainly not.
So you can't even tell Canadians at this point what it means when he says his department will be enhancing oversight and monitoring of funding during the transition period. You can't speak to that because you're not speaking to the minister.
So, Mr. Chair, the Deputy Minister of the Department has appeared here and spoke to what measures they're undertaking.
It's not my question.
It's for the department to give an account on their work.
Sir, it's my time. Thank you. You are not able to educate Canadians as to what the minister meant by saying he's going to provide enhanced oversight and monitoring of funding. You're not speaking with him, so you don't know what he means by that, do you?
Mr. Chair, as far as what we'll do to run this program when it's transferred to us, I've spoken to that in my testimony.
That's not my question. Simply say yes or no. You don't know what that means. During this transition period, you're not communicating with the minister. You don't know what enhanced monitoring means, do you?
Mr. Chair, the responsibility for the files that SDTC has now rests with the foundation. It has a new board.
Not you. So you can't answer that question.
Well, Mr. Chair,
okay.
the board
he also talked about a reinforced contribution agreement with ISED. We know that the existing contribution agreements were extremely violated to the tune of $390 million going to companies that were simply ineligible or were conflicted. So what is the reinforced contribution agreement?
Mr. Chair, just that would be a question to be addressed to ISED.
Right.
Who has responsibility for the contribution agreement, not with us.
Right. So Canadians are no more the wiser after hearing this testimony today as to what changes Minister Champagne has introduced for over the next 10 months until SDTC comes under your review and ambit at the end of Q4. I guess we're supposed to say, listen to the government. We'll just trust the government that they're going to do best. They're going to learn from their mistakes, and they're going to ensure that they're going to be proper economic stewards of our taxpayer funds. It's a just trust me type of response. You're not in communication with him. Canadians are no longer confident as to how he's complying with reviewing everything that's being funded in the green tech energy sector. We have no idea, do we?
Mr. Chair, I believe at the time this was raised, I'm not sure exactly the date, but funding was suspended. And then a new board has been put in place, and that changes everything at the foundation about who directs
the other question that Canadians have in mind is how are we going to recover that $393 million that was improperly transferred? What do you say to Canadians? What is the process that the government has shared with you as to how we're going to recoup that money?
Mr. Chair, the question of recovery was discussed in a previous testimony. I believe questions were asked of the Deputy Minister, other witnesses that have been here. Those questions are best asked to the department.
To your knowledge, has it started? Has the recovery process started?
Mr. Chair, the NRC isn't involved with the current files of SDTC. I'm not in no position to answer the member's question. Sorry.
Well, presumably you're going to be answering these questions at the end of Q4. So you're not talking about it now as to what steps the government is taking to recover taxpayer funds?
So, Mr. Chair, what we anticipate is the files that will be transferred to us will be ones that are in good standing that we can carry forward and continue to administer the agreements that are transferred to us and the relationship with those clients. That's how the process has been structured. So questions as to recovery and so on would be, of course, best addressed to other parties.
Thank you very much. Mr. Weiler, you have the floor again for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I really appreciate the answers that our witnesses are giving today. But I do want to pick up on the line of questioning that my colleague, Ms. Bradford, had on the HR violations at SDTC. Can you speak to any strategies that you have in place to investigate and resolve the allegations of HR violations within SDTC going forward?
Mr. Chair, I don't think it will be the place for the NRC to investigate violations related to a prior employer. Obviously, our jurisdiction will be with our employees, the people that join the NRC, and then how we work with them to have a good workplace where they feel that they can do their job, do it best, and uphold public trust that's placed in us. But the NRC has no role in terms of investigative activities involving with SDTC, the foundation, and I think those are questions that have been looked at under prior processes that have been discussed here and so on, but I'm not in a position directly to speak to that work.
Okay, within NRC and IRAP, and within your employees, how are whistleblowers protected?
So, Mr. Chair, there's a number of levels, of course, that are important. Certainly, individuals who might feel there could be reprisals or actions taken if they raised concerns. So, as I'd mentioned, we have a process where employees can disclose concerns. They come to our most senior ethics officer. They're reviewed, investigated as one would expect, establishing the facts, and then coming up with resolution for those issues in the case that it's warranted. And that process also protects those employees from any recusal or any, I should say, any actions to be taken because they've raised questions or concerns. And then there's obviously an act of Parliament, a law that provides them that protection as well that applies to all of our employees, and they can go to the parliamentary officer to raise concerns if they wish to have those things investigated, if they so choose.
Thank you. Changing gears a little bit, with regard to both IRAP and STDC, I'm wondering if you could speak to how both programs may interact and complement each other in terms of their impacts in the innovation supply chain, because it does seem to me that there is that level of complementarity.
Chair, I think if you look at the funding that NRC IRAP provides compared to the funding that SDTC has provided, essentially there is a sort of a continuum of support where NRC IRAP would work at an earlier stage and provide a smaller amount of funding at an earlier stage of a company, and then SDTC is providing more funding and obviously working at a subsequent point of the business's evolution. It's not a perfect continuum or linear in any way, and then there would be cases where clients of IRAP are also clients of SDTC. So I think as far as the questions goes, we can certainly see how we can provide a continuum of support within the programming that we'll be offering to clean tech innovators from the earliest stage to later stages in their development and growth.
So when both are merged under the Canadian Innovation Corporation, how do you see this framework supporting innovation and growth in the Canadian economy more writ large?
So, Mr. Chair, of course, the Canada Innovation Corporation and the question of how it would work is something that was subject of a blueprint that was issued by the government some time ago to explain its goals and its objectives, obviously to provide a continuous support to innovators and entrepreneurs. And it would, by virtue of that blueprint, provide support from the earlier stage to later stages where more significant funding might be involved in terms of particular technologies, particular risks, things that are hard to get up off the ground, and where public support will be warranted. And the purposes of the company, or the corporation, the Crown Corporation in that case, will be able to provide a continuum of support to those innovators and entrepreneurs. So in some ways, the bringing in of SDTC into NRC IRAP is sort of a first stage of that kind of system where we start at the early stage, get a relationship with a company, provide support through regular IRAP, but also be able to work with them later on as they grow, and the challenges are increased in terms of scaling those firms up so that they become sustainable businesses.
Thank you. If you have a short one, go ahead.
I'll just end it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now going to begin our fourth and final round, going back to Mr. Genuis, who is no longer on his porch, now appears to be in the House of Commons. Over to you, Garnet, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. The sun was in my eyes. It's very clear that this is the same old SDTC, despite claims about changes. This NDP Liberal government's corrupt green slush fund, loaded with conflict of interest. It hasn't changed because it's still being administered by a board using exactly the same model. And the NRC can't answer questions about basic conflict of interest issues that are ongoing. Now, the constant theme that we have at this committee on various issues here, public accounts, is that when things go wrong, the ministers apparently have nothing to do with it. They always want to describe themselves, and Liberal members want to describe ministers as mere passengers on the ship of state. I'm sorry to see that likely at the industry file, we have yet another Liberal minister that seems to be more focused on leadership campaign preparations than on governing. I want to ask specifically, Minister Champagne has said, as Mr. Brock talked about, that there would be enhanced monitoring during the interim period and changes to contribution agreements. When the minister said that, was he telling the truth?
Mr. Chair, I think the previous testimony taken here about the interim period and the monitoring, the review of the files, the AG's observations and those being accepted by the department and SDTC are important. They're there on the record to establish how things will proceed.
Just answer the question. I mean, was the minister, who you report to as well ultimately, was the minister telling the truth when he said they were putting in place changes to contribution agreements and enhanced monitoring? Was Minister Champagne telling the truth? Yes or no?
So, Mr. Chair, the minister's actions are there on the record in terms of suspension of funding, putting in place a new interim board and a process to review the recommendations that have been made, particularly the Auditor General's report, and take appropriate action on that, and then subsequently to have it transferred to us.
I'll stop you there. I mean, I asked you the question twice, and you can't tell me clearly that the minister that you report to was telling the truth, which suggests he wasn't. And hopefully we'll have him before this committee so that he can give an answer directly to that, because he made some claims about changes at SDTC that just don't seem to have actually been made at all. Now, I want to ask about bonuses. Have bonuses been paid to executives, directors, managers that have been working on this green slush fund? Are people that are working on this receiving bonuses?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm not in a position to address bonuses of SDTC or its employees. I think those questions have to be addressed to the organization itself to provide an answer for the members.
Okay, but so you're supposed to be taking over administration of it. So should those bonuses be paid? Will you recommend that they not be paid? What's your position on that going forward?
So, Mr. Chair, I think the employment of SDTC employees is subject to their arrangements with the foundation. At the point in time they become NRC employees, then it'll fall under our regime for compensation, and that's a completely separate employer, and obviously we'll count for what we're doing with those employees once they join our organization.
Should they receive bonuses, though?
Mr. Chair, I have no views to share with the committee in terms of, the work of SDTC employees and bonuses. That's something you should address to the organization itself.
Okay, I mean, with you taking it over, I would have hoped for a little more on that. But final line of questioning here: would ministers or Liberal political staffers be able to invest in companies that benefit from this green slush fund? Would any have investments? Would any be able to receive those investments?
So, Mr. Chair, without speculating, I think the question is really any of these people that have been mentioned in the question is what conflict of interest procedures apply to their own roles, and I think you'd have to address that to those individuals and in the circumstances. Certainly nothing I can give an account
sorry
to.
Jump in, but NRC is going to be responsible for giving out this money. So what conflict of interest procedures would apply to dispensing those funds?
Mr. Chair, as I said, the conflict of interest policy of the National Research Council will apply to any program that comes under our care. And certainly in this case, it will apply to the Sustainable Development Technology Programming funding that we will have care of once we've had it transferred.
Have rules that would prevent this kind of conflict of interest, that would prevent political staffers, ministers who own companies from having those companies benefit. Do your rules prevent that? I think it's a simple, clear question, and I'm not getting an answer. Can you give a clear answer? Would your existing policies allow staffers, ministers to benefit? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, the conflict of interest policy of the NRC and our administration of funds is taken place by professionals. They'll direct funds where there's eligibility and benefits for Canadians, and with the application of our conflict of interest policy to their activities. And we take those decisions within the National Research Council.
Thank you, Mr. Genuis. That is...
Chair, I'd like to raise a point of order.
I'll hear a point of order. Yes, Mr. Genuis.
Thank you, Chair. I think I pretty clearly and repeatedly asked the question that the witness pretty clearly refused to answer despite multiple attempts. I'd like to ask you to put the question to the witness and ask him to inform him of his obligations as a witness. I didn't ask if they had a conflict of interest policy. I asked what the policy is, and witnesses have an obligation to answer clear questions, especially when repeatedly asked over and over again in a clear form.
Thank you, Mr. Genuis. I have a point of order as well from Ms. Khalid.
On that same point of order, Chair, I don't think that is a point of order at all, and I don't think that that we can force an answer from witnesses.
Well, I do have that ability. Having said that, I am. Mr. Davies is here. He's answering questions. We might not like the answers. I think his non-answers speak for themselves. You will have one other round. The official opposition. You're welcome to press it again. I am going to move on. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I would like to talk more reasonably than the previous round. So the Canadian Council of Innovators sees the Canada Innovation Corporation as a fundamental shift in approach in supporting innovation and growth, given its focus on commercialization and protecting Canadian IP from leaving our shores. How fundamental is this, in your view, to supporting growth in our country, especially at a time where business investment is low and we're dealing with challenges with respect to productivity?
Mr. Chair, obviously it's critical when we speak about Canadian benefits in the programs that we're talking about administering. It really is in regards to seeing those businesses be able to grow, be able to create IP, be able to see the returns and the benefits of that captured here in Canada for benefits of Canadians and Canadian workers. All that's very critical, and I think seeing those kinds of investments, which are risky, undertaken and supported, and seeing things grow here in Canada is really the ultimate goal of these programs, and it's obviously a critical long-term objective for the economy, and really important because that's what establishes the life that we all here enjoy in Canada, and establishes kind of productivity performance that we need to have as a country. And many of these initiatives are all aimed at that, including, as was mentioned, the Canada Innovation Corporation. Yes.
Thanks for that. And what would be the impacts on business without programs like SDTC and IRAP, given that business investment is low? What state would innovation be in our country without government supports like this?
So, Mr. Chair, it's long been looked at as far as the support that's provided from public and different types of programming, whether it's through tax incentives or direct supports, that these are critical, particularly at the early stage of technology development and innovation. This is a place where the risks often outweigh the potential returns or even the ability to assess those returns. And these programs, I think, are there to ensure that that activity takes place, because if it didn't happen, then we would all be worse off. Each country has an approach to this. Canada has a system of various programs and tax supports and so on, which are all there aimed to help support financing of activities that are obviously going to support growth for the long term, including NRC IRAP and, of course, the SCTC program for its life. And so obviously keeping that programming available to the sector and to the innovators and entrepreneurs is the objective of the current exercise that we're involved in to bring this transition to a conclusion on a timely basis.
Thank you for that. And I couldn't agree with you more. We need to support these industries in order for Canada to have a say in the world stage. I think it is very important for us to develop and continue to improve these programs to make sure that our industries are improving and that the Canadian economy is growing, because it matters right down to each individual Canadian. Now, you know, the Conservatives are quite hell-bent on undermining program innovators, startups, and small businesses, that really help and support this country. Now, if the Conservatives can so easily go against business interest, their key constituency, why would Canadians ever trust them? And they're so hell-bent on destroying public trust of our public sector. It is, I think, very shameful that they're going to these lengths of really undermining what our public sector stands for, the work that the public sector does to ensure that industry thrives and continues to grow in Canada. That's all the questions I have, Chair.
I think that was more of a statement then, would you say? Yeah, I didn't think you were looking for an answer, and I don't think the witness did as well. Okay, thank you very much. Encore une fois, c'est Madame Sinclair.
Once again, Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Davies, you seem very confident in your responses on the topic of public servants' work with the NRC and their ability to manage the assessment of eligibility in different projects, but we know that SDTC, on the contrary, was misguided in their assessment of 10 projects' eligibility. There were conflict of interest problems. There were projects that were funded during the pandemic, despite the fact that they were ineligible. So have the employees of SDTC not been working properly? Is that the problem?
Important for me to, consider fairly the employees that work at SDTC. They've been in a challenging circumstance. Obviously, there's been information brought to public's attention, processes that were undertaken to review human resources management at SCTC. I'll leave that to stand. We're not involved in that directly. I think we also want to provide an opportunity for those employees to join NRC IRAP and bring their talent and capabilities.
C'est exactement là où je m'en allais.
And that's actually the direction I was headed in, despite the fact, and once again, this goes with what you said earlier, staff needs to do their work well when approving a project. So if the project is approved despite the fact that it was ineligible, then there is an issue. So what is the issue? Are they not competent? Is it something else? So what are you going to do with all these employees that are going to come work for the NRC? Repeating what you said, if staff is doing their job properly, then an eligible project will not find itself funded.
That, in any given person's case of their own employment, that there's a due process. I think that's quite fundamental. And I think as a matter of the SCTC employees as a whole, we have been asked and will make offers to employees that can join our organization in good standing.
Donc, j'en comprends que beaucoup d'employés.
So what I'm understanding is that many SDTC employees will not receive an employment offer from NRC.
Mr. Chair, our job is to try to provide continuity of programming to take into the NRC the employees that can deliver it, and we've been asked to ensure that there's a continuity, and we certainly will ensure that that's done. And then employees that join us will have to meet our terms and conditions.
Mais vous n'avez pas répondu,
But you didn't answer the question. Will you take all the employees, part of them, maybe half? Will you take just a handful? How many SDTC employees will you be taking on? I know continuity is great, but we're looking for numbers here.
Overall population employees, numbers between 60 and 70, from what I understand. And we'll make employment offers to those that have an interest, and at the end we'll find how many employees decide to join our team. But we'll certainly be making offers to SDTC employees, as has been obviously shared with them. It's very important in the continuity of this work. They're now working away on the transition. We also need those employees and their information, their knowledge, and their awareness of the sustainable technology goals in the program that we'll offer in the future. And it's important that we don't start off without having the kind of people that know how to adjudicate the files. And obviously, they'll come under our employment terms and conditions. And obviously, they'll have to meet those terms and conditions before they're employed by the NRC, including the application of our conflict of interest policy, which will be established and reviewed with everyone day one.
Et voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Desjardins, this is your last 2.5-minute round. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I again want to thank the witnesses for your testimony today and assisting us in our study related to SDTC and the very serious situation of conflict of interest, issues of mismanagement, issues of people on the board and even members of the ministry not knowing for certain the leadership that was required to ensure the successful delivery of what should have been a very successful program that would have assisted small and medium-sized businesses across Canada, would have assisted Canadian innovation, would have ensured that more jobs in Canada could have been created through this fund. But unfortunately, because of this mismanagement, it's clear to me, and I think clear to Canadians, that there's serious change that needs to be required while delivering a like program. We heard today that, of course, one of my biggest concerns, and the concerns I often hear from my constituents, is related to the recovery of funds, how funds will be recovered from ineligible projects. Mr. Davies, you did mention to me that there is an ongoing conversation. What is your role in that conversation, and what responsibility do you have in relation to that very important mandate that even the Auditor General cites as credible and important, particularly in my view, to building or rebuilding public trust?
Mr. Chair, the question is on the question of recovery. I think
recovery of funds of ineligible recipients. So
our role at this point is that we're not involved in the recovery process or evaluating that. And it was, I believe, a topic that was discussed here previously. So I think the questions on that would be best addressed to the department or an SDTC or perhaps both to be able to.
So do you feel you have no role or responsibility in the recovery of these funds? Even in the instance where some projects that are currently eligible haven't received funds because of the freezing of the fund that could be eligible under your new program, wouldn't you say that you have some level of responsibility, or at least should advise SDTC as to the transfer of during the transfer of the program of the process that should be undertaken for the recovery of funds?
So, Mr. Chair, I think without having a final answer as to the structure of the transition, structure of the transfer of the files, I'm not in a position to say exactly what may or may not apply to any given file.
I understand.
And whether
Mr.
there's
Davies,
an ongoing obligation.
my last comment would be, would you be willing to supply this committee, once you do have that information that you're seeking, that would better clarify for us and our committee and our study on behalf of Canadians, the process that will be undertaken for the recovery of funds, particularly as it relates to your role as the receiver of this new program and the terms and conditions that may be required or adhered to that would ensure the recovery of taxpayer dollar for ineligible funds. Would you commit to that today?
So, Mr. Chair, to the extent that we have a specific role in respect of recovery, we'd certainly share that with the committee or Canadians generally. And what I won't do is speculate exactly as to how those files will be addressed in the current process that's undergoing review between SDTC and the department. So, but I certainly can say going forward, if we have a role in recovery, then obviously we'll be very transparent about what it is.
Yes, please do. I'm very encouraged by that statement and hope that you could play a role in the recovery on behalf of Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that back and forth. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So along the same lines, the Auditor General, as you know, tabled with this committee further to her audit that $390 million of taxpayer money has been either voted on in a conflict of interest and include $58 million that was given outside of the limits of the contribution agreements, the parameters of it. You're going to receive this pile of stuff within 4 to 6 months. And I have no confidence that the Liberal Minister of Industry or his department who screwed all this up will get that $390 million back. Will you commit that if they have not gotten it back, you will follow the Auditor General's report and the comments of the Deputy Minister that this money needs to be recovered and go after that money?
Mr. Chair, I think the question of recovery and the question of how that will be addressed is being established in the transition process. What I assume is that the files we receive will be in good standing. There'll be files that have standing under the contribution agreement that are eligible and that we can carry on our work to provide any ongoing funding that might be well required for those files or to work with those clients. That's the assumption I make.
What does good standing mean? That the money's been recovered and you don't have to do any of the work? Because NRC had a scandal in the Chrétien government where employees were taking kickbacks on grants and NRC had to get that money back. So you do have experience, or the NRC does have experience of trying to recover inappropriate money. More experience than, unfortunately, than the department does. So will you commit that you will get it? Because good standing doesn't mean anything to me.
Mr. Chair, good standing, as I'm defining it, is that they would be eligible, files that are eligible under the program. Obviously, I can say that to the extent that we have a legal role to recover any funds due to the Crown, then, obviously that's something we would follow up on because it would be, within our authority to do so. As we do now, if we ever have funds that are owing as a consequence of programs that we already run. So that's the framework that
will you ensure that the employees, you talked about employee offers, the employees that were involved in putting this forward, including the current acting president who fast-tracked the Visharian Center proposal through SDTC and were involved in this Liberal cover-up corruption, and the Liberals are trying to cover it up, are not offered new positions since they were involved in helping this happen already, as well as any of those corrupt directors that are there.
Mr. Chair, our approach with SDC employees is that we'll be working with the vast majority of employees to provide offers, and the senior executives, the interim board are working with the senior executives on their employment as it is now, and you could address those questions to the interim board as to their relationship with the most senior employees in SDTC.
And will you make any IRAP advisory board member resign who is currently involved with SDTC in order to ensure we don't have the same level of corruption happen under your leadership that's happened under the Liberal leadership of Minister Champagne, that does not continue?
So, Mr. Chair, as I believe my colleague had mentioned, our current IRAP advisory board, to our knowledge, doesn't have anyone that's involved in this topic or circumstances.
I asked if they do, will you make sure they're off the board?
Mr. Chair, we want all of our advisory committee members to be people that, obviously are there and serve in the public trust and maintain the confidence on
means basis. Not double dipping like 9 directors the Auditor General identified. Mr. Chair, with that, because of this testimony received earlier, I'd like to move the following motion. And we've given it to the clerk if the clerk wants to distribute it.
Why don't you read it first, then, Mr. Perkins? We'll just double check that it is in fact the same.
Okay.
Before sending it around.
That as part of the committee's ongoing study of Sustainable Development and Technology Canada, SDTC, the committee agrees to A, extend its current study of the Auditor General report by inviting the following additional witnesses. These are in addition to the study that we have ongoing now in the list of outstanding witnesses. So the new additional witnesses, given the testimony, John Newbley, the former Deputy Minister of ISED, where a lot of this happened, Casey Doyle, acting board member of SDTC, Martha Morgan, acting board member of SDTC, Stephen Guilbeault, Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. I'll explain why him in a few minutes. André-Lise Matteau, founder of Cycle Capital and a former member of SDTC board. Stephen Kukucha, former board member of SDTC. Guy Ouimet, former board member of SDTC. And Annette Basharian, former chair of SDTC. And that B, the committee report to the House that it asks the Auditor General to undertake a value for money and performance audit on the work done by SDTC since January 1st, 2017.
Just hold there. I'm going to suspend just for a second. I'm going to first endeavor to get this out to all members, so just hold on a second. So I'm going to allow Mr. Perkins to just wrap up his comments briefly. I have an agreement, or pardon me, I have a request to then have the last questioner or the last member ask the witnesses questions. It will take 5 minutes. And if there's agreement, I'll do that. Now, that does circumvent the normal procedure, which is to turn to motions right away. I will remind people that this opens up the opportunity to end the meeting, but I remind people that I will bring us back to deal with this matter immediately if that happens. So on good faith, I think we're going to do that. I have been not scheduling meetings next week during caucus, but if there is funny business on this and this agreement is upended for any reason, then I will use the powers I have to return to this forthwith. So, Mr. Perkins, you have the floor briefly, then I will turn to Ms. Bradford to ask her last round of questions, then I will excuse the witnesses and we'll turn to this motion. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So briefly, we have an existing motion with continuing studies that I know there are a number of witnesses that the clerk has been trying to get before the committee, but in light of the testimony today and some of the earlier testimony, perhaps, Mr. Chair, I could briefly explain why the addition of these folks. John Newbley, the former deputy minister, he was there. As most know, Simon Kennedy, I think, has been the deputy minister there for only about a year, but most of what has happened under SDTC's term, including the appointment of some of these directors that were brought out in the Auditor General's report, was under Mr. Newbley's tenure as deputy, and he was involved very much in the discussions of what was called managed conflicts between the former president of SDTC, Leah Lawrence, and the government in seeking out a chair replacement. I think we've had a lot of testimony today already about the clarification that the witnesses have given us about their current role and responsibility versus that of the acting board that the minister appointed. Our current existing study motion has the current acting chair of that on the list, but it did not have either Casey Doyle or Martha Morgan, who are the other two that the minister appointed, so I believe they should also appear. Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of Environment, in his public disclosure, continues to hold shares in one of the largest recipients of funds from the Liberal Green Slush Fund. Cycle Capital's received over $200 million, and Stephen Guilbeault not only worked there before being elected, but was still owns shares in his public disclosure and is benefiting from the investment by SDTC in Cycle Capital's businesses. André-Lise Matteau was his boss at Cycle Capital and is the founder there. And again, she has received, as I said, her company, since its inception, over $200 million of Green Slush Fund money. Stephen Kukucha and Guy Ouimet both were directors of SDTC who also had conflict of interest pointed out by the Auditor General in terms of funds that went to companies they had interests in. In fact, the Ethics Commissioner report mentions Guy Ouimet but doesn't actually proclaim anything about him. even though it's clear from the evidence that he voted in favor of $4 million for his own company. And Annette Visharan, who we all know is the chair of SDTC, who was appointed and knowing that she had been doing business with SDTC, and that set a culture of conflict. And that culture of conflict, as we know, is 196 of a little over 226 projects the Auditor General looked at were actually projects that had some sort of conflict of interest declaration, and therefore set the tone when she joined about the issue of it being okay to just leave the room when 82% of the transactions being approved by the board are to conflicts. That is clearly goes way beyond just bad legal advice. And on B, because the Auditor General only did a selection of the projects and did not look at the full $800 million that was given out in that audit period of the $832 million that was given out of the $2.1 billion that the Green Slush Fund has given out since its inception. We are asking that the Auditor General do a full audit of everything, because we believe we've only scratched the surface with his random sampling of projects.
Thank you. As I said, there was some discussions that we proceed to Ms. Bradford, just to the last member on the docket to ask questions for 5 minutes. Do I have agreement from, because generally we go right to the motion, but there was some back and forth. Do I have agreement to turn the floor over to Ms. Bradford for 5 minutes? Then we'll go back to Mr. Perkins' motion. Yes. I'm seeing yeses. Okay. Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. ISET published a report in October 2023 with suggestions and an action plan that SDTC had to implement by December 2023. Has this action plan been implemented, and are there any updates?
Question is obviously responsibility of ISED and follow-up, and so I know there has been a discussion at the committee with the Deputy Minister of the Department, and obviously it's for ISED to provide an accounting to the committee as to its actions and follow-up on that action plan that was shared with the public. The NRC is obviously working in collaboration with ISED and with SDTC on the transition process that we've described today, and to ensure that it's done on a timely basis and that we can provide some stability for the stakeholders that work with SDTC, and obviously for the employees as well involved.
The government announced this major programming transition back in June. Are the timelines you're currently working with usual practice for this type of transition?
Mr. Chair, you know, as I said in my opening comments, we're endeavoring to get this work done within a year. There's a lot to do, and you know, for all the reasons that are clear in the conversation that's taken place today, to look at the files and be able to prepare them to transfer to us, and then for us to prepare the systems and obviously our offer to employees to carry on the programming. And we're hoping to do this hopefully earlier than that year, but obviously we're endeavoring to meet that commitment to Canadians, and it's what's expected of us to get this transition underway and carry it out as fast as we possibly can.
So given that it's no longer an arm's-length organization, can you speak to how exactly SDTC is now subject to the FAA, as is customary for all government agencies, and what are the implications of this? So,
Mr. Chair, to be helpful, but you'd probably best ask this of SDTC or ISED to have a specific answer. But I think because of the SDTC being established under its own legislation, set up as a foundation, I'm not certain whether the Financial Administration Act directly applies to SDTC and its activities, but that would be something that probably is best addressed to experts in the department that could talk about that. I certainly know the Financial Administration Act does apply to the National Research Council.
And how are you going to ensure that the mission of clean tech is back at the core of what SDTC does and the potential it has to do good for Canada's clean tech firms and industry who need its support?
So, Mr. Chair, I'd say first the strategic plan of the National Research Council has among its priorities climate and sustainability, and in fact it has a lot to do with research work we do and also support for innovation that is provided through NRC IRAP. Further, the programming that we'll be able to provide for sustainable technology will move to the NRC IRAP organization and with the appropriate staff that can make sure that we deliver that, taking into account the economic goals and objectives of the program, but also the sustainability objectives that are now and have been reviewed by SDTC in its consideration of files, and we'll obviously bring those employees and expertise over to NRC IRAP to continue that work.
Okay, thank you. Well, I know that many of the small and medium businesses would not be able to survive without these funds and incur the capital outlay to transition to clean green tech. So hopefully you'll be able to ensure that that continues. I have no further questions. I want to thank you very much for attending today and answering all these multiple questions so fully. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. In a moment, I'm just going to suspend for a few minutes. In the meantime, I will thank the witnesses for coming in today, for answering our questions to the best of your ability. I know there was some requests for information. If you could send that through to the clerk. When I know some of them where there was a timeline on one that Mr. Desjardins requested, we will look for that information when it is available, please. And you're excused. Thank you very much. We will return in about 5 minutes to pick up Mr. Perkins' motion. I'll give him the floor first. All right, we'll make it 10. Now that we have you here, all right, we'll be back in 10 minutes. This meeting is suspended only.